Hey, welcome to our last and final video on summer semester. That doesn't mean the final video together on our journey, just for summer semester. So stay tuned. Next week we have more videos. This is the final video for the whole semester. So the main thing that I did this week was focus on my Intro to Religious Studies class, get it done. Had to just finish up a few extra things for that class. We talked about this week as a continuation of last week. It was the idea of secularism, how as society there's a belief that as societies improve themselves, as societies become more advanced, like in technology or science and things like that, that tends to be a negative for religion. The secularism is a bad thing for religion, and you know, after looking at the watching the lectures and reading different things about how secularism has affected different religions, my perspective was that it isn't secularism isn't always a bad thing. And what I mean by that is I noticed that there's two ways secularism can influence a religion. One is from an external perspective. So this is outside the religion. So this could be like change in the government. This could be societal shifts, those kinds of things. So one thing that's important to look at is throughout most of history, it was extremely common that society and religion were the same thing. They were always tend to be interjoined. Mainly, a lot of that I think is because they couldn't explain a lot of things as far as understanding the science or reasoning behind phenomenon from happening. And so religion became a way to understand what's going on and try to deal with the weather or changes in stuff we can't control. But through religion we feel like we have a sense of control over those things because we can pray to a weather god if we have a drought to get rain. We could pray to a god of war to or pronounce cursings on our enemies, or do divination to try to see the future of, is this battle going to work out or not, or things like that. So religion to an extent has been just an ingrained part of society. Well, starting around the 1700s, as intellectualism started to grow, as more scientific discoveries came out, as we had the ability to examine and think about things different, that started to change. And that's kind of this rise of secularism. So as societies have progressed in their scientific understanding, sometimes we go, oh, we now know why that works. We don't have to think about it from a religious context anymore. That's one of these external changes that can happen where society itself just goes, oh yeah, that's what's happening, like the idea of getting sick. So it was common that if you got sick, usually there was some kind of like an emotional, mental, or spiritual thing. Maybe somebody's put a curse on you. Maybe you are involved in a sin and this is your punishment, or stuff like that can happen. Then we get into like the ideas of the days of Louis Pasteur, where we started understanding the concept of germ theory, that there are bugs, microscopic bugs, that can infect our bodies, viruses, bacteria, and things. And then that changed it. We didn't have to think about, oh, this is caused by a curse from God. No, that's caused by bacteria, a virus, or something else that gets inside of you. So now we have to think about how to combat these types of diseases and things. So as science has changed, as things have improved and we can explain more, we haven't needed to rely on religious ideas or concepts to explain things. So some people will see this as a negative, like, I don't need religion in my life. Well, it did change religion. Some people would say I don't need it as much because science proves that religious philosophy isn't completely true. But we have to understand that religion tends to deal more with metaphysical ideas, mystical things that are hard to explain through science. Miracles like Christ walking on water, or healing people who've been injured or born with genetic defects and things like that. So there's a lot of still a lot of questions science can't answer, but also realize that science can't touch the concept of salvation and having a better next life and those kinds of things. Science is really confined to this world. So over these centuries, our perspective of how does religion impact our life has changed. So one common change that I talk about in the essay I wrote was that this concept of separation of church and state. Sometimes we see this as a negative, like, oh, it's so bad that the nation's gone secular because we have the separation of church and state. And in reality, when you look at it, again, if you look through history, most nations have been in a situation where they have a uh, a union of church and state. So you see Catholicism through the Middle East, or I mean Europe, sorry, through all the Middle Ages and places like that. Islam tends to be in there as well. Judaism, and it's not bad to have your government and your religion be interconnected, uh, but it can also cause some problems that we see in history too. And one of the big problems is whatever religion is the state religion, no other religion has as much of a chance of success. That could be good, that could be bad. It depends on what you're looking at. So the idea of separation of church and state has said, okay, the state will not basically, recognize only one religion. The state has no vested interest in dealing with religion at all. We're going to let religion do its own thing. That has allowed, like here in America, that has allowed an explosion of religious philosophies and ideas and concepts. I mean, the Reformation was a great thing that happened in Europe, but it didn't really, I mean, it wasn't until the Great Awakenings and the opportunities here in America that it just took off because there was religious freedom, basically. So you can kind of see this idea of as the government pushed religious philosophy out in a way that helped more religions to grow. Now, that doesn't mean, I think we've gone to the extreme of pushing anything that is considered a religious philosophy, like being honest. We've pushed that out of society because it's seen as a religious point. And I think that's where we've gone too far in the idea of separation of church and state. That there are some things that will overlap between the two, and they should be promoted because they're good for society. So we don't have to talk about them just because it's also religious teaching, but can be a good thing for society. We don't have to put a religious spin on it to promote it, but we should have those ideas and values and standards there, basically. So we let the pendulum swing too far the other way. But inside a religion, you can have secularism inside a religion where people, the members, start to shift their perception of the religion through adopting secular ideas or looking at things from a different perspective. That's where I think secularism has the biggest problem, is when you have a group of members in a church. It doesn't necessarily matter what church it is, but if they decide, hey, you know what, we need to shift how we think of God and kind of devalue what we're doing and change how religion works to where there is no defining line. Religion, and if you read the Bible and things, you can tell that in a way there's a line. There's a defining line in there that says if you get on this side of the line, you're good. You get saved. You have salvation. If you stay on this side of the line, you don't have salvation. The whole idea of what is a sin versus what is righteous or keeping the commandments. There are lines drawn in Christianity and most religions. So when we see this, and people want to get rid of all that and kind of take the religion, almost take God out of the religion in a way, that's when I think religions have the biggest problem. Secularism's inside. The other thing we talked about that was really fun to discuss was this idea of religious movements inside a religion. So we can see this, the Great Reformation was a common one that a lot of me and the other students talked about, how it came from within Catholicism and came out. There were several other ones from Hinduism and Buddhism and other groups that came off. I mean, Buddhism itself came out of Hinduism also. So there are opportunities where a new religion or new idea is separated out from an existing one. Most of them don't work out. Like even for the LDS Church, people don't realize there's like 40 or 50. I think that's a low number on the scale of number of churches started as members branching off from the LDS Church. They've all, with the exception of a couple like Community of Christ, have pretty much died. I think the FLDS is still around technically, um, as well. But it's interesting because inside a religion, it seems like, and in the readings we had, we saw this across a lot of different religions. Islam, we saw this, Hinduism, Judaism, lots of other groups, that you kind of have your main religion, okay? And then there's two groups or two philosophies, or I call them flavors, two flavors of reformation or change that starts to emerge inside a religion. One of them you could call more progressive ways of thinking. So that is a philosophy in a religion that says, how can we take what we know and understand it within a modern context? How can we kind of modernize our religion a little bit more? Taken to the extreme, it would be more of how can we make our religion fit current societal ideas. So there's kind of a sweet spot you want to hit of how can we keep our religion relevant in today's world, basically, and not make today's world shift our religion. There's a fine line in there you got to be careful with. But then there's another group that you could call conservative or orthodox. These are the groups inside a religion that they say, you know what, our religion is this way. We need to resist the progression of our religion, and we need to go back to more like ancient ways of doing things and stick there. So in a religion, it's healthy, I believe, to have both of these areas going back and forth. The debate and discussion, so long as you can keep it polite, you can keep it moving forward, is a good debate to just say, okay, what are the things of our religion that should not change? And what are the things of our religion that need to change to keep up with today's world? So that's how you get a religion that becomes more dynamic, is having these two camps have discussions and debates between themselves, between each other, I should say, that cause us to understand and reinterpret our understanding of our religion. So, like, for instance, some people get mad. I know even in the LDS Church, the idea of like temples, temples have been around for a long time. You could point to modern LDS temple philosophies and ideas and rites all the way back to the days of the tabernacle in Moses in the wilderness and other places like that. So there's some concepts that they've never changed. They've always kind of been that way. But there are things that have changed in the LDS temples. When Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and them were doing the endowments before, the initiatory endowments was all the same ordinance. It was all one. It was divided out later after the St. George Temple, around that time frame, that they split that into two different ordinances. Some of the wording that bothered a lot of people in today's world that has changed in the last few years, some of that wording is pretty original to the endowment. And it just didn't, people had a hard time with that in today's world. And so some of that was updated. Now, the major part of the ordinance, that's basically never changed. It's always been that way. But other things have. So it's interesting that sometimes we look at stuff and go, okay, we believe this. But the problem is it all 100% true, or is it just a small part of the larger truth? We're not seeing the whole piece yet. That's the challenge that we have when we look at our beliefs. It's good to believe what you believe, but maybe it's not the full and complete truth. And we can point even in the Old Testament, the law of Moses was a good thing to follow, but it wasn't complete. Christ added more to it. Christ took it and said, okay, here's what you believe, but now let's give you a little bit more of an expanded perspective of this. It's not just enough to kill your neighbor. It's think about if you're angry with your neighbor, have hate for your neighbor, that's bad too. So we don't have all the truth, and I don't think we have all of it yet. There's still more for us to learn. Otherwise, especially in the LDS Church, they would reword Article of Faith number 9, because we still believe in continuing revelation. So we have to realize that sometimes what we know now isn't the full truth, and we need to understand more. And that's where the more this idea of the progressivism and concepts can help with that. Now, there are some things that need to stay the same and shouldn't be changed, and that's where those conservative perspectives can help us. So I would say spend less time focusing on one or the other, like which one's right, which one's wrong. Don't think of it as a binary in that way of one's right, one's wrong type idea. Think about what can I learn from both? And how can I use both of these ideas to compare and contrast to help me find more truth? That's I think, a better way to phrase it and look at those things. So that basically concludes our summer semester. Thank you for following me. If you want to go back and watch other videos, if you haven't watched them, to just kind of see all some of the concepts and ideas we've learned about. So I want to talk about next semester. Next semester, I have 3 more classes. One of them is Intro to Religious, not Intro to Religious Studies. I just about said that. I just took that class. The next one is Intro to Interreligious Discussion or Leadership. So that's going to be a fun one to do. That one's going to talk about, and I haven't gotten too far into it myself yet, but I believe that one's going to get into a lot of these ideas of how can religions come together, not necessarily doctrinally, but how can religions work together to create positive change in the world around us, basically. So I think that's more of what that is. And this is a relatively new concept. This is something that started more like 1800s time frame. This idea of, instead of religions persecuting each other and hating each other and trying to best each other, it's more about how can religions say, look, we have doctrinal differences, but we have common goals that we need to accomplish to help our societies out. We want to come together for that common good for society. So it's kind of a putting your faith in action and combining with other people with their faith in action for that common goal. So I think that's what that class is going to be about. There's a certificate. There's like 3 classes in that series. You can get a certificate for I think at the end. So I just thought, why not get it while I'm doing the rest of this stuff too? Because it all counts for the same credit. So I get just extra bonus for all the efforts that I'm putting in. So that'll be a fun one. That's a 1090 class, so it's not going to be a super hard class. Thankfully, that'll be like my Intro to Religious Studies class. Still good, but not quite as hard on the homework. My next class is Mormonism and Early American Studies. And I think I've mentioned that in past videos. I'm really excited for that class. Being a member of the church myself, I love to learn about it and understand it better, and that class is going to help me see the church history from a whole different perspective. In fact, one of the books that we had to read, there were 4 books I read for that class. I thought there were 5, but actually there's only 3 we needed for fall semester. But I bought all 5 and I've been reading them. So one of them is a book called American Zion. If you want to understand LDS church history without seeing it from a faith-promoting standpoint of what we'd have in the church's official history, then American Zion is the book you want to read. It's a really good book that helps you to kind of see the church's history from a more scholarly perspective rather than a faith-promoting perspective, which is why the church put their history together, is they wanted to put together the parts of the history that would help promote more faith in the church. And that's why they've designed it that way. And it's not bad that they've done that. Some people get mad at the church for glazing over certain parts of the history or changing things around. I'm like, look, no, the directive from God, and you can see it in the book of Revelation, not book of Revelations, book of Doctrine and Covenants. You can see that the revelation that God gave to Joseph Smith to say, hey, we need to put a history together for the church, compile this. We need a history that helps promote faith. That was the mandate that was given to them. They're just following what God told them to do, basically. So it's not bad to have a hermeneutic of faith building in church history. Realize church history is church history. It is stuff that has happened and that has been recorded. Not all of it has been recorded. Some of it has been recorded well, some not well. It's just the way it's worked out with the kind of technology and the ability to record and do things they had back in the 1800s, and results of wars and fires and destructions and other things that have gone on. So what we have is what we have, and it's not bad. Okay, some of it's going to be faith promoting, some of it's not going to be faith promoting. That's okay. That's totally okay. So American Zion is a great way to look at church history from a standpoint of not trying to only tell the stories that make the church look good, but more of an even perspective of it. If you are LDS and you've never read the Saints, then American Zion might shock you a little bit. You might be kind of surprised about some of the things you read in there. Understand as much as we hold high regard for the apostles and the prophet and people like that in the church, they're still human and they still make mistakes and have problems. And so the thing to realize is God uses imperfect people to do his work. And it shows it in the early days of the church when they didn't have as much formalness as we do today. They didn't have as much put together and organized like we have today. They were trying to figure it out, and so there were some trial and error, some things that happened. So do not take anything you read about church history as, oh, it must be imperfect then. Oh my gosh, and then just everything falls and crumbles after that. No. Always realize that the church is full of imperfect people. It doesn't mean that Jesus Christ isn't the Christ and your Lord and Savior. It doesn't mean that baptism's not needed. It means that the church is an organization to help imperfect humans, and it's going to be ran imperfectly. You can see it in the scriptures. You can read the New Testament. It's all imperfect. There's so much there that we tend to think. We want to think in simple terms. We don't want to have to think hard, which I think is a bad thing. We need to be willing to learn and be willing to do hard things. And think hard things is important too, just as much as hard work. Be willing to understand that the society and world's a lot more complicated than we think. It's not as simple as we'd like it to seem. So just realize that, okay? So there's several other books. I'm going to talk about those over the next couple weeks as we get ready to start the next semester, which are all great books about that class. Now, my third class is a master's level class. It's a kind of a directed readings on religious history. We have 12 books to read for that class. That's a lot of reading. 12 books in 14 weeks. So I'm trying to get ahead. I got the list a couple months ago from my professor of the books we're going to read, and I've been trying to get ahead of those books. So I'm gonna talk, because we're gonna read one a week anyways in the class. I'm going to talk about each book as we go through the class, basically, and describe those. I've gotten 3. I think I'm on book 4 of it right now, and some fun books. Really interesting books to read. Not necessarily casual reading type books. They're between 250 to 350 pages long. Very deep into history and telling these concepts and ideas and things. So not light reading type books, not a Lord of the Rings, or a fictional type book, but these are great books. They're fun. A lot of good things to learn. So if you love history, and especially religious history, we're going to have some fun conversations over the next fall semester time frame. So this video is already getting too long, so I'm going to end it here, and we'll see you next week as I'll talk about a couple more books for my Mormonism class that I've had to read and what they have in them. So, and why you should probably read them too. So we'll see you then.